Riel. Sorry. Dear colleagues, dear participants, dear Dr. Van Riel, it is a great honor to welcome Dr. Allard to our Institute workshop. The Institute of Innovation Management has been working on the topic of fast growth companies and small and medium business in Russia approximately 10 years. We also studying international experience, and our research focuses on companies that are growing rapidly through technological innovation. It's our special focus. And we have conducted several waves of research on Russian technology fast growth companies since 2015, and starting previous year by joining the newly formed Graduate School of Business of the High School of Economics. We are starting a new 5-year, I hope, longitudinal study on fast growth technology companies, and would be delighted to have a broad collaboration with Dr. Van Riel on the topic of rapid business growth. I suppose it's very interesting topic of today workshop, individual ambidexterity as a condition for innovation driving growth in small medium enterprise. And I suppose that this workshop was very good opportunities to discuss the problems which are very interesting for our institute and for other colleagues and other participants of our workshop. Thank you, Sasha. You will be continuing.
Thank you very much, Dan. Dear colleagues, let me introduce myself. My name is Alexander Stepanov. I'm working at Institute of Innovation Management at Graduate School of Business of the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, Russia. I'd like to remind that our workshop is a regular event, and it is dedicated to, first of all, it's dedicated to high growth companies, high growth businesses. And I'd like to say that, as I know, although Dr. Van Riel's research was not done with a specific type of organization, for example, high growth, but it can be argued that especially high growth small and medium enterprises, this type of organizations depend very much on leads from their salespeople and the capacity to interpret information from customers in terms of future needs and sources of innovation. In that sense, the study of forms of individual ambidexterity at the sales representative level is important. So it's of course it's a great honor to have you, Dr. Van Riel, here at our regular workshop. I'd like to say that our agenda for today is about 20 minutes of Dr. Van Riel's presentation, and then about 20 minutes for your questions and discussion. Without further ado, I'd like to pass a word to Dr. Van Riel. Over to you.
Okay, I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, thank you very much for the nice introduction. It's a great pleasure to be on this workshop, and a great honor. I'm actually delighted to be able to share some recent research with you. And also what I will share at the end of the presentation is some ideas for further research. Okay, my name is Allard van Riel. I'm a professor of innovation management. I have been working at a number of universities recently. I'm now affiliated with University of Hasselt in Belgium. I'm originally from the Netherlands, where I have been working at Maastricht University, where I got my PhD, and the University of Nijmegen, Radboud University. The project that I'm going to present today is a collaboration with colleagues from Radboud University in Nijmegen. I need to mention, of course, the names. My major co-researcher in this project is Dr. Roel Schouteten. He is in the Department of Strategic Human Resource Management, and doctoral candidate, Mrs. Ting Mu, a Chinese colleague, and she is doing her PhD at Radboud University. Okay, I'd like to first introduce you to the concept of ambidexterity for those who do not know it. Then I will talk about ambidexterity at the organizational level. I will try to explain why stress why SMEs in this sense are different from multinational enterprises where much of the research has been done, and show you how important and how relevant I think that ambidexterity at the individual level is for SMEs. And I've been doing a lot of research over the past 10 years, focusing actually on innovation in SMEs and indeed identifying the role of ambidexterity in these companies. I will try to identify a few gaps in the literature and show you how our studies address those gaps in the literature. I will present you our studies and then come to the research agenda. Okay, the concept of ambidexterity is a very old one. Ambidexterity is a Greek word. It's basically meaning having two right hands. Ambidexterity means in the translation to business and business economics, being able to address tasks that have opposite requirements. And that is a difficult thing. So ambidexterity on the one hand is seen to be a highly desirable capability, but on the other side, of course, it is also very problematic and very demanding on the organizations that are ambidextrous. The concept was introduced to organization studies, to economics, by March in 1991. And he basically introduced the exploration-exploitation paradox. And companies that need to survive in a very dynamic business environment need to be very efficient on the one hand and productive, but on the other hand, they also need to explore, to be innovative, and to basically develop and design new products and services. The idea of ambidexterity fits very well with the resource-based view. And you could say that ambidexterity is a capability of organizations, the capability to be both effective and efficient, and at the same time innovative and developing new ideas. And that means that when you are ambidextrous as an organization, you can actually focus both on what we call operational excellence, be good in exploiting the resources, the limited resources that you have, focus on cost control, productivity, but at the same time, the idea of innovation and improvement of processes. And therefore, in the very recent literature, ambidexterity is also seen as a dynamic capability that allows organizations to survive in very dynamic environments. And I think that SMEs in general, especially the high growth SMEs, are generally in very dynamic environments where a lot of technological change is happening, but also market change and of course a lot of innovation. The idea of ambidexterity, well, it started in the 1990s. And it has been implemented in large companies in many different ways, mostly by actually separating the two elements, having one part of the organization focusing on the efficiency, on cost control, on productivity, and another part of the organization focusing on exploration, on creativity, on innovation. And that, of course, requires quite a difficult structure, a hybrid structure, and hybrid control systems that allow this division of the organization in two parts that are basically managed in different ways. Sometimes in organizations, the functions exploration and exploitation have not been divided over two different parts of the organization, but the organization shifts between them. For a while, they are focusing on innovation, and then later on, they move back to exploitation. More recently, organizations also focused either on either R&D or on sales and production. And you can think of companies like Nike or Apple, who are extremely good at innovation, at creativity, and basically outsource all other things to other organizations. Even more recently, we see that open innovation is also playing a role, and organizations basically purchase innovations in a market environment. And here you can think about companies like Rolls-Royce, and they basically purchase innovations from a marketplace of startups and small companies that are still very creative, not very much focused on the efficiency and productivity part. Different capabilities are required, of course, to manage these different implementations of ambidexterity. And the last one, for example, Rolls-Royce, is mainly focusing on managing their partners, organizing basically or orchestrating the innovation by other partners. Ambidextrous change can therefore be done depending on the environment the organization resides in. This is a very nice little figure coming from the Boston Consultancy Group, where you can see on the vertical axis the diversity, and on the horizontal axis dynamism. And you can see if both are very low, companies basically don't need to focus on ambidexterity, and they can remain very static. They don't really need to innovate. However, when diversity and dynamism increase in the environment, then they must start focusing on doing both at the same time. And they can do that either by separating it into two different parts of the organization or switching. And then when diversity and dynamism increase even further, organizations start to develop hubs of innovating elements in the organization. And if you go one step further, basically the organization is dependent on what happens in their external ecosystem for open innovation, where they can actually select and purchase innovations from external parties. Individual ambidexterity is basically the ambidexterity of individual employees. And what we see in many areas is that individuals in many industries are basically required to be increasingly ambidextrous, which basically means they have to deal with tasks that require opposite skills from them. For example, most of us are employed in education, and we have to do teaching and we have to do research. And that means we have to be ambidextrous. In teaching, we are exploiting resources, we are in a highly regulated environment, whereas on the other hand, in research, we are being creative and we are exploring. In healthcare, in many hospitals nowadays, startups are actually exploiting the experience and level of knowledge of the individual professionals active in the area. So, for example, if a hospital innovates, it's generally because of a medical professional is both executing the medical profession, but at the same time thinking about it and innovating and improving procedures, products, and services. And of course, in many areas of engineering, we see the same. Many engineers are focusing at the same time on optimization of existing technologies while they consider innovating and finding breakthrough solutions or new solutions to existing problems. Now, of course, we all know that SMEs are not M&Es. They are limited in general in their resources. They don't have the possibility to always separate these functions into different departments. They may not have sufficient expertise to engage in open innovation, maybe just as a seller of technology, but not as a buyer of that. And they don't have sufficient experience and size to insource innovation. Furthermore, I think in most SMEs, what you see is that the salespeople, the sales engineers, account managers are those who are in direct contact with customers and therefore have the best information about what's going on, what needs are developing in the market. And that means that it's the salespeople who actually have the best expertise for innovation, if you want to be market driven. So I argue that ambidexterity at the individual level is required and very important for organic growth of SMEs. And what is also found in the literature is that individuals, salespeople in an organization who are ambidextrous make basically the whole organization more ambidextrous, allow the organization to indeed exploit their resources on the one hand, but on the other hand, simultaneously engage in innovative activities. When we look at the literature about ambidexterity, well, there is a lot of literature about organizational level ambidexterity, but there is a growing basis of literature about individual ambidexterity. There is research, for example, about representatives in call centers who are helping people delivering customer service and at the same time cross-selling, for example, to these people. That is also a form of ambidexterity. Basically, servicing is more exploitative and cross-selling is then more, servicing is more explorative, and cross-selling is more exploiting the resources. What we also notice, and that is definitely the case in, for example, these call centers, is that ambidexterity does not only have desired consequences for the organization, but it also has a lot of negative consequences for the individuals involved. There can be role stress, people get basically unclear about the targets that they have to achieve. And there are some serious negative effects on, for example, the well-being and job satisfaction. So this is an issue that needs further research. In our research project, which started approximately 4 years ago, we basically asked ourselves, what kind of HR solutions can we develop that help to stimulate ambidexterity on the one hand, and that means the positive side of ambidexterity, performing both in exploitative and explorative tasks, but at the same time without the negative consequences, the undesired outcomes. If we look at the model that we try to develop, I'm going from the left side to the right side. Ambidexterity is very often produced by the tasks that people have to perform and the job characteristics. So we think that these are the main drivers of ambidexterity. And when we look at job characteristics, we can think of job design, for example, how to design a job for the employee to be or become more ambidextrous, allow to use their ambidexterity in solving the problems encountered in that job. Then, of course, the mechanism is ambidexterity, doing these two things at the same time, more or less. And that has an effect, we know, a very positive effect on performance in terms of innovation, but also in terms of sales. And it could have a positive effect on job satisfaction. For example, in many interviews I did with surgeons, people in the medical profession, they feel very satisfied about their ability to both perform their job and at the same time also innovate, find new solutions to solve problems they encounter in their job. So there can be a positive effect on job satisfaction. However, there can also be these potentially negative outcomes that make doing the job less satisfactory or even impossible. What we did 3 studies. One of them is published in 2020. Actually, that was a literature review where we looked into the literature on individual ambidexterity, which is a very conflicting literature. There was not much coherence in modeling ambidexterity or in even conceptualizing ambidexterity at the individual level. What we did in that literature review is build a theory about ambidexterity and try to better understand the concept at the individual level. We are currently in the process of we have a second study running at the moment where we, based on the conceptualization published in 2020, we have developed a measurement scale, and we are now trying to test the links in the model. And the third study, which is also on its way, we're collecting the data currently in China, is trying to identify cultural elements of ambidexterity, and because ambidexterity is partially dependent on the cultural background of the individual and especially also of the companies. The conceptualization we came up with is relatively simple. We try to combine 2 dimensions of ambidexterity. I'm going to explain first the one on the left side, on the vertical axis. You can be ambidextrous, doing these opposite tasks sequentially, switching basically, like we discussed in the organizational ambidexterity diagram, or you can do them simultaneously at the same time, combining them. And then we have the second dimension of the process, which is the balance dimension, which distinguishes a balanced execution of ambidexterity, basically measuring the extent to which a person goes either to the explorative end of the scale or to the exploitative end of the scale, or at the other end, the combined function where you basically integrate the two. Based on this model, what we did is produce a scale, a measurement scale, and now we're going to try to understand how these different forms of individual ambidexterity influence the model, and especially the effects on both, in a positive sense, on performance, and in a negative sense on role stress and negative effects on well-being of the employees. And we do that by varying the task characteristics and the job characteristics. We have collected about 500 observations of individuals employees in SMEs in functions where they are required to be ambidextrous, and we are very excited about the findings so far. I cannot really reveal much because we're still in the process of optimizing the analysis. But the first thing we did was indeed validate the scale. So we have a second order scale development procedure behind us, which was working quite well. And now the next step is indeed to also see the effects under different task and job conditions on performance and on the negative outcomes. We are working on this paper. We hope we can submit it somewhere by summer, and hopefully that will be published in fall of this year. Okay, that brings me to the end of my presentation. As you see, I'm extremely excited about the idea of ambidexterity. There are a number of things that need to be done. We need to indeed validate this model that we have proposed. We need to adapt or test the model for different cultures. We try to find two extremes, Western SMEs in the Netherlands and mostly state-controlled SMEs in China. But of course, there are different cultural contexts than China and the Netherlands. So we think that it might be useful to look at other contexts. A very interesting opening, I think, or an opportunity for research is to not measure ambidexterity based on a questionnaire, but rather to look inside the brain and how the brain actually deals with coping with these different tasks, so connected to neuroscience. We all know that men in general have difficulty doing two things at the same time. So we also would be very much interested in finding out whether there is a genderedness to ambidexterity, and indeed female workers may be better at ambidexterity in tasks. And we would like to further explore the task characteristics. So what kind of tasks provoke ambidexterity, what kind of tasks characteristics reduce the ambidexterity in employees. And then ultimately, the goal of the project we are currently working on is to identify some HRM tactics that may help to stimulate ambidexterity in employees, but at the same time minimize the negative outcomes. And then based on that, those tactics, we would also like to develop some training methods that could be used by companies to reinforce the ambidexterity of employees, for example, salespeople or sales engineers, or even medical professionals in hospitals. And then ultimately, we also think it would be very useful to have an ambidexterity assessment questionnaire where companies could basically select individuals that have already developed the skill of ambidexterity. Okay, that brings me to the end of my very short presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm ready to answer your questions or suggestions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Van Riel. We certainly enjoyed your presentation. It was very interesting, I think, thought-provoking, because this topic, of course, has a lot of links to many other disciplines and many other areas of research. So, dear colleagues, any questions or comments? Just
yes, I have one question. Okay, first of all, Professor, thank you for an amazing presentation, and I'm particularly interested in your, I would say, last paper, which is entitled "Identifying Cultural Influences on Ambidexterity at the Individual Level: Comparison between Netherlands and China." And what I'm particularly interested in is the fact that is there already any evidence on like differences between ambidexterity modes in open market and open opportunity societies and the so-called societies with limited access like China, or you and your colleagues will be, let's say, first comers in this field?
Thank you for your question. There is research. There is some research, of course, in the West, and most of the research was done in Western countries, US or in Europe. And there is some research in China, and basically they have conflicting results. And we are the first to actually combine the two and have big data collection effort in China and in the Netherlands at the same time, and hope to establish the differences, either institutional differences and effects of them on ambidexterity, but also some other variables that we have included, more cultural variables. So I think we are going to be the first to be able to really compare these two extreme environments and see what the effects are on ambidexterity and on performance. The funny thing is that ambidexterity in the West is very often seen as a highly positive outcome, whereas in China it has been found to have negative effects on performance. So this is a very interesting contradiction, and we would like to better understand that and make our model a bit more generalizable culturally. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Professor.
Okay, thank you.
We also have a question in our conference chat. This is a question from Anastasia Ivanova. I think I can read it aloud for you. Dear Professor Allard van Riel, thank you for your presentation and curious research introduction. Could you be so kind to explain the idea of preliminary conceptualization, difference between temporal and balance dimensions?
Yes.
Especially, unfortunately, the principle of balance dimensions division into two groups is not clear for me. Could you please explain it a bit more?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for your question, Anastasia. I will start with the temporal dimension. So this is something that has not been researched a lot in individual ambidexterity research. It was at least discussed in the model I mentioned or I showed by the Boston Consultancy Group, where they indicate that it is possible for companies to switch between the two modes. So you can have, for a while, you focus on exploitation, and then you switch back to exploration, and you switch back to exploitation. For individual employees, that would mean that in time, you switch between the two modes. So for example, when you are a call center employee and you are trying to provide customer service to a customer, you can focus for 3 minutes on basically on providing help to that customer, and then switch to selling, to cross-selling, for example. We know that you have a problem with your car, so why don't you buy a new car, for example. It's just that would be the temporal dimension. The balance dimension is about the extent to which the different the two extremes are prevalent in the job. So, for example, some jobs have a rather unbalanced constitution. So you focus more on innovation and less on exploitation, or the other way around, or they are perfectly balanced. And then the third dimension is actually combining it or separating it. So you can see that we try to bring in the time dimension by actually making it possible to have these four. I can go back to my, let me see if that works. Yeah, this one. We try to develop a typology of 4 different forms of ambidexterity. And I can explain to you what they mean, because I was expecting this question. The wire dancer is basically having a balanced approach to exploitation and exploration, and is doing it simultaneously. So you can imagine a wire dancer balancing indeed, and at the same time doing both. This is something that would happen, for example, in a knowledge-intensive context. For example, SMEs, where the resources are constrained and the employee in a knowledge-intensive context needs to, on the one hand, provide advice, and then on the other hand, needs to collect information from the customer that allows them to find new solutions. I hope I make that clear. That's the kind of situation we would expect the wire dancer to be active in, simultaneous, switching very rapidly, probably, and trying to keep the balance between the two. The synergist is combined and simultaneously, and this is in organizations where or at least we expect this to happen in organizations where very fast changes occur, where people really need to be able to do things at the same time and in a combined way. I can read you how it was defined. It is the behavioral orientation of employees towards combining exploitation and exploration related activities simultaneously. That's the definition given. Then we have in the sequential dimension the pendulum, basically going up and down like a pendulum between the two, or the juggler, who is basically keeping all balls in the air at the same time. These are the 4 types of ambidexterity that we see in employees who are facing situations, contexts, or tasks that require different approaches to simultaneity, simultaneousness, and ambidexterity. I hope that answers your question. Oh, I'm seeing another question. Thank you for your reply. One more question, if you're not against. No, I'm not. How do the suggested dimensions, are they identified in the research data? Okay, what we did in the first paper, so this is the published paper, and I put the reference in the presentation. I'm happy to share my presentation with you. I don't know, Alexander, is that possible? Can you distribute the presentation?
Yes, of course. Okay, then I'm happy to share the presentation, and you can have the reference. This was done conceptually, so basically by reviewing the literature on individual ambidexterity. However, in our second paper, which is not published yet, we have developed a scale to measure these different dimensions of ambidexterity, and this is something we really hope to be publishing soon, and then you can also have access to the way we measured and operationalized the different dimensions. What we noticed in the validation of the scale is that it works as expected. So far we can confirm that we do find these 4 different types in the population. We have surveyed 500 individuals from SMEs working in functions like sales or sales engineering, and we do find these 4 different types of ambidexterity. Of course, now it's up to us to show under which conditions, which tasks, or which job context
they perform in these four different ways. I hope that answers the question. It was a long answer, but
okay. I think.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sure.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. So I want to look at this study in a contingency perspective. So there are studies that have suggested that for organization ambidexterity, that it might not be good to be an ambidextrous in a stable time, but it's good in maybe in a crisis situation. Mm-hmm. So under this individual ambidexterity, what does the environment actually, or how will I put it? Is there, given the disadvantage of individual ambidexterity and the cost and all these things, is it important to engage in ambidexterity during crisis or stable time? What do you think?
I think if we interpret the Boston Consultancy Group matrix, they say if everything is stable, if you don't need to engage in innovation, basically you don't need to be ambidextrous. So the need for ambidexterity is definitely going down when the environment is stable and there is no development. However, I would argue that most companies nowadays are in a very dynamic environment where a lot of things are going on, if only from the technological aspect. I mean, we are currently in a revolution where AI and all sorts of data analytics are playing an increasingly important role. Plus, we are in a very dynamic environment in terms of the markets that are moving and changing. So I think most companies are currently in a very dynamic environment, and therefore I would argue ambidexterity, either of the company or of the individual employees, plays a very important role in the success of innovation and growth. So I mean, of course, this does not really apply to your local bakery. I guess they are not in an environment where ambidexterity makes sense. However, if you're in technology, if you're in international markets, I think it does make sense. Yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Any other questions or comments? Dear colleagues? Dr. Van Riel, do we have time for one or two questions?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I have another meeting at 10 o'clock here, 11 o'clock Moscow time, but I'm available.
Okay. Let me ask my question. If we imagine that I'm a top manager of a company which is not ambidextrous, but this company, well, trying to understand if it should strive to become ambidextrous or not. What kind of advice could you give me in this situation?
Yeah, thank you.
What should be my first step, and what can I do first?
Thank you for that question. Yeah. I have been working in a company that actually made that switch from non-ambidextrous to ambidextrous. I'll tell you a little bit about the industry. I was in the academic textbook industry. I was working for a large textbook publisher. And the sales reps were first only targeting selling books to academics. So they basically visited academics. But then the company realized that actually the sales reps had the best information, or could have the best information about the needs of the market. And they wanted to basically exploit that insight or that expertise or potential expertise of the salespeople. And they decided to change the job description of the sales reps from sales reps to informers, and informers in two directions, basically. And the sales reps were required to end every sales talk with the question like, okay, so and how can we help you? What would be, what would be your needs in your domain? This was quite a shock because people were not, used to suddenly become the informers, the intelligence of the organization. And it took a little while before it was actually implemented. But yeah, I think if you know that your employees who are in touch with your customers have the best information about the market, about the needs of those customers, then it is probably necessary to become ambidextrous and make them not only sell products to their customers or service products, but also at the same time collect information from them and maybe, yeah, in a kind of collaborative way, think about improving things, about innovating. So my idea would be, if you know that your main source of ideas for innovation is your customer, then make sure that your employees become ambidextrous and also engage in collecting information from the customers. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much. The colleagues, any other questions, comments?
One question, please.
Just a moment, Dan. We have also a question in conference chat.
Yeah.
From Anastasia Ivanova. Dear Professor Riel, could you please share with us the final expected outcome of your research?
Yeah, I can do that. What we currently have, we have a conference paper, but it's only half the research. So I'll be happy to share that with you, but it's only half the research. The full paper will be hopefully finalized by the end of summer. So yes, I'm happy to share it with you. It's something I'm also excited about. So yeah, with pleasure.
Thanks. Dan, your question?
One question. Could you tell me, what do you mean? Does ambidexterity depend on the sector of market or sector of industry?
Yes, thank you for the question. Indeed, I think that ambidexterity, or the need for ambidexterity, does depend on the sector, in the sense that if you are in a sector, for example, B2B, working directly with customers, for example, if you're in an engineering company and you're working with customers, then I would say you are ambidexterity is extremely important, because you basically co-develop your products or your services or your technology together with your customers. So there it is almost 100% necessary to be ambidextrous, because the sales engineers are actually the bridge between the company and the customer. And in some other companies, some other sectors, it is less important, I guess, when you have intelligence from individual consumers. I think you can do market research. You don't need your salespeople to do that. So depending on indeed on the situation on the market, there is a greater or a smaller need for ambidexterity. I know that, at least in my experience, many SMEs are working B2B, and therefore I would argue that in SMEs it is important to be ambidextrous, and also to be it explicitly, and to stress with the salespeople that they are the most important source of new ideas, of needs from the customers, and therefore a strong factor in the growth of these SMEs. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, I think we have time for one more question, maybe, or comment. If you yet another question or comment from Anastasia. I mean, the final idea of the research is the idea to explore the correlation between ambidexterity and companies' performance, or to suggest the conditions to choose one of the individual behavior for SME sales managers.
Yes, indeed. So this is also the challenge in our research. The question is indeed, yeah, what are the moderating factors in the model? Indeed, is our specific task conditions favoring one of the four modes of ambidexterity in terms of outcomes? And not only performance, but also, as I said, we're also very much interested in role stress and difficulties that employees may have, because you don't want employees to burn out on ambidexterity. It is challenging to do these different things at the same time. People do feel it really as demanding on their intellectual capabilities. So yes, we are indeed trying to come up with some guidelines indeed for which type of ambidexterity leads to best results versus lowest negative effects on the employees. And especially because especially in SMEs, of course, companies depend very much on their employees, and you really don't want them to burn out on this issue. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Van Riel. We are happy to have you, and we really we would like to thank you for such an interesting presentation, and this topic is really, I think, thought-provoking and very fruitful potentially.
Yeah.
And I also would like to thank all of the participants. All participants. We have appreciated your engagement and everything that you all have contributed to this workshop. I'm going to send your presentation, Dr. Van Riel, today for all the participants, because I have emails. So I'm going to send it today. Yeah. And thank you very much.
I will be delighted to share also the article. So I'll send you the article, and you may share that with the participants of the workshop. And I hope it's useful for them. Thank you very much. It was a great experience. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to a next session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, colleagues. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.